The witching hour had bled into the grey pre-dawn, and the silence in Wen Jinshan's penthouse was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Yuan Yu, unable to sleep, crept from her small room, drawn by a sliver of light from under the living room door. She found him there, a lone silhouette against the sprawling city lights, his back rigid, his hands clenched on the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. He hadn't touched the sleeping pills she'd left by his bedside. "Master," she whispered, her voice barely a ripple in the stillness. He didn't turn. "The night is too long, Yu. It swallows everything." His voice was raw, stripped of its usual commanding tone. It was the voice of a man clinging to a ledge. "I'm afraid that if I close my eyes, I won't wake up. Or worse, I'll wake up and still be in the dark." The confession hung in the air. A shocking, intimate admission from a man who commanded industries by day. This wasn't the powerful CEO or her demanding online master. This was just a man, terrified of the shadows. The professional boundary they had drawn, a line of polite distance and formal titles, seemed absurd now. Her feet moved before her mind could object, closing the space between them. Hesitantly, she wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her cheek against the cool silk of his pajamas. He flinched, a tremor of surprise running through his tense frame. "What are you doing?" he murmured, his voice tight. "We agreed on distance. That was a daytime rule," she replied, her voice soft but firm against his back. "Daytime rules are for people who aren't afraid of the dark." He didn't pull away. Instead, after a long, drawn-out moment, the tension in his shoulders eased by a fraction. A quiet understanding passed between them, a fragile truce with the night brokered by a simple, desperate act of human connection. The hug was chaste, comforting, yet it buzzed with an unspoken electricity that rewired the very foundation of their arrangement. When he finally spoke again, his voice was almost boyish. "I'm hungry." It was the smallest crack in his armor, but for you, it felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. She led him to the kitchen island, the rising sun now painting the sky in strokes of rose and gold. With practiced ease, she prepared breakfast, her movements a quiet ballet of comfort. She scooped warm, silken tofu pudding into a bowl, drizzling it with a light, sweet syrup, a simple dish from her childhood, a world away from the gourmet meals his chefs usually prepared. He ate in silence, his focus entirely on the bowl in his hands. A faint smile touched his lips, the first genuine one she had ever seen on him. "I haven't had this in years," he said, his voice regaining its familiar, smoother cadence. "It's good." Seeing him so relaxed, so unguarded, made you bold. "You seem much better today. Maybe you should spend more time with your fiancé. I'm sure she'd love to make you breakfast." She meant it innocently, parroting the gossip she'd heard about the brilliant Ms. Yi, who was his rumored match. Jinshan's spoon paused. His expression didn't change, but a coolness flickered in his eyes. "Some arrangements are just contracts, Yu. They have nothing to do with tofu pudding." He set the spoon down, his gaze turning analytical, sharp. He was the CEO again. "Speaking of arrangements, what about yours? Your online fiancé master. He seems good at nothing but giving you orders. If you want to break that engagement, you need to prove you don't need him." He leaned forward slightly. "Breakthrough or bottleneck at work. Show him and yourself that you can stand on your own." Yu's good mood evaporated. Anger, fierce and protective, flared in her chest. How dare he insult Master? Master was her guy, her mentor. He didn't know the first thing about their connection. "You're wrong," she said. Her chin lifted. "Master is brilliant, and I will prove it. I'll break through, and you'll see." He merely smirked, a knowing glint in his eye. "I'm counting on it." The confidence she felt in his apartment shattered the moment she stepped into the WS Group lobby. The soaring atrium, the gleaming marble, The impeccably dressed employees moving with shark-like purpose, it all screamed of a world she didn't belong to. She felt like a stray puppy in a palace, her portfolio clutched to her chest like a shield. Her sense of displacement intensified when an imposing, silver-haired man swept into Jinshin's office, followed by a woman of such pristine elegance that Yu felt her own simple dress will in her presence. Jinshin, the older man, whom she quickly realized was Chairman Wen, his grandfather, said without preamble, "Ms. Yi is here to discuss the Esha Coast project. You will give her your full cooperation. This alliance is crucial." His tone left no room for argument. When Jinshin, seated behind his monolithic desk, looked every bit the formidable CEO, the vulnerable man from the night before was gone, replaced by a cool, detached executive. "Grandfather, my team has it under control, Ms. Yi smiled, a perfectly calibrated expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course they do, Jinshin. But your grandfather is right. A project of this scale requires a united front." She glanced around the office, her gaze sweeping past Yu as if she were a piece of furniture, before landing back on Jinshin. "Don't worry, I won't take up too much of your time. I'll handle the preliminary meeting." She subtly dismissed him, asserting her authority with effortless grace. Yu stood frozen by the door, feeling her insignificance like a physical weight. As they left, she overheard two assistants whispering by the coffee station. "Did you see them? Chairman Wen and Miss Yi. They're the only ones who can manage CEO Wen. I heard he was a mess after his accident. Miss Yi basically saved the European merger. She's not just his fiancée, she's his business partner. They're a power couple. Jealousy, sharp and unwelcome, twisted in Yu's gut. This was his world, a world of mergers and alliances of powerful women like Ms. Yi, a world where a simple girl who made tofu pudding had no place. Later that afternoon, the confirmation of her irrelevance was delivered personally. Yu was organizing files in a quiet corridor when Ms. Yi appeared, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. "You on Yu, is it?" Ms. Yi's voice was as smooth and cold as marble. She stopped directly in front of Yu, her posture radiating an unassailable authority. "I've reviewed your file. You're an intern on the Asher Coast project." "Yes, Ms. Yi." "Quit," she said, the single word delivered with chilling finality. "Your presence here is an unnecessary complication. The deal with our partners is in a delicate phase. Any perception of instability around CEO when any distractions could jeopardize everything. If you care at all about this company, or about him, you'll be gone by morning." The splintering crack of the door frame was the sound of Yu's world breaking. She threw her shoulder against the wood again, a sob of pure terror catching in her throat. The security latch gave way with a final, metallic groan, and she stumbled into the suffocating silence of the apartment. He was on the floor, slumped against the sleek leather sofa, his head lolling back. An overturned bottle of pills lay beside his outstretched hand, a scattering of white tablets like fallen stars on the dark rug. "Master," she whispered, the name a fragile prayer. His eyes were half closed, a vacant glaze stealing the light from them. "No," she breathed, scrambling to his side. "No, you don't get to do this." She shook his shoulders, first gently, then with frantic force. "Wake up. Please, Jinshin, wake up." His eyelids fluttered, a flicker of awareness returning. He looked at her, his expression not one of relief, but of profound, hollow despair. He tried to push her away, his movements sluggish but determined. "Let me go. I won't," she cried, grabbing his wrists, her grip surprisingly strong. She was no match for him physically, but her desperation was an armor. "You can't leave. You can't leave me," the words tumbled out, raw and selfish and true. She wasn't a professional. She was just a woman terrified of being left alone in the dark. He was so determined to enter. Tears streamed down her face, blurring his pale, handsome features. "Promise me," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Promise me you'll answer when I call. Promise you won't run away again." He stared at her for a long, silent moment, the fight draining from him. A single tear traced a path from the corner of his eye. "I promise," he whispered, the words barely audible. It was a fragile truce, a thread of a commitment in an ocean of pain, but it was enough. A week later, the clinking of silverware on fine china felt jarringly loud. The restaurant was an oasis of quiet luxury, a world away from the desperate chaos of his apartment. Yu pushed a letter of resignation across the polished table. "I can't do this anymore, master," she said, her voice low. "I'm not qualified. You need professional help, not me." When Jinchen didn't even glance at the letter, he simply placed his hand over it, his long fingers covering her neatly typed name. "You're not leaving," he stated. "It wasn't a request. You're my boss. You can't force me to stay," she argued, her heart hammering. His gaze intensified, a deep, searching look that seemed to peel back all her defenses. "Is someone threatening you?" he asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Is it my family? Did they say something?" The question caught her off guard. She saw the raw fear in his eyes, fear for her. It wasn't the command of a CEO. It was the plea of a man terrified of losing his only lifeline. Her resolve wavered. Was this about his well-being, or was it something more? Something that felt dangerously like need? "No," she said, pulling her hand back. "No one's threatening me." She looked at the resignation letter, turned back at his haunted eyes. I'll reconsider. Her commitment to him, fragile as it was, felt more real than any employment contract. To prove it, not just to him but to herself, she decided to sever the last tie to her old, prescribed life. That evening, she walked into his apartment holding a different document. "I'm breaking the engagement," she announced, her voice firm with a newfound sense of control. She placed the termination agreement for her arranged marriage on the coffee table. "I don't know this one, Jinchen, and I have no intention of marrying a stranger. My life is here with you." He stared at the papers, his face unreadable. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. When he finally looked up, his expression was one she had never seen before, a devastating mix of guilt, pain, and desperation. "You can't break it, he said, his voice strained. "Why not?" she shot back, confused. "It's my life." He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over her. He looked down at the name on the document, then back at her, his eyes shining with unused tears. The carefully constructed walls around him crumbled in an instant. "Because," he said, his voice breaking, "I am Jinchen." The words hung in the air, electric and impossible. Yu's breath hitched. The papers slipped from her numb fingers, fluttering to the floor. The man she knew as master, the vulnerable artist she had protected and cared for, was the cold, distant CEO she was contracted to marry. The room began to spin. Every shared glance, every moment of intimacy, every whispered confession was suddenly tainted, rewritten into a grotesque lie. "What?" she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "I was afraid," he rushed to explain, stepping toward her. "I was afraid you would see the title, the money, and not me. I wanted you to fall for just me, not for Jinchen." His explanation washed over her, but it didn't soothe the sting of betrayal. It amplified it. She felt like the world's biggest fool, a pawn in an elaborate, cruel game she didn't even know she was playing. He had watched her struggle, listened to her complain about her faceless fiancé, and said nothing. He had let her fall for a ghost, a carefully crafted persona, while he held all the cards. "So all of this, it was a lie?" she asked, her voice trembling with a rage that eclipsed the shock. Our entire relationship. No, you. My feelings for you are the only real thing, he pleaded, reaching for her. She flinched back as if burned. Don't touch me. The words were ice. She couldn't breathe the same air as his deception. Turning on her heel, she fled the apartment, his desperate calls of her name chasing her down the hall. She ended up at her friend Xiaorong's tiny apartment, collapsing onto the sofa in a flood of incoherent tears. He's Wen Jinchen, she finally managed to choke out, recounting the entire story, the secret identity, the shared moments, the crushing weight of the engagement she was trying to end for his sake. I feel so stupid, Xiaorong. So humiliated. We were intimate, and I was engaged to him the whole time and didn't even know it. Xiaorong, ever the romantic, initially tried to smooth things over. Maybe he really did it for love. Yu scoffed, wiping angrily at her tears. He manipulated me. He watched me unknowingly prepare to marry him, while I was falling for his fake identity. That's not love, that's a sickness. As the full scope of the deception became clear, Xiaorong's expression hardened in solidarity. Okay. That's not love, that's a 5-star. Triple a bastard. For 2 days, you ignored Jinchen's endless calls and texts. Then, Xiaorong burst into the room, holding up her phone. You need to see this. It was a live business interview. On the screen, looking impossibly handsome and composed in a tailored suit, was Wen Jinchen. He answered questions with his usual cool efficiency. But then the reporter changed tack. Mr. Wen, there are rumors about your long-standing engagement. Can you confirm you'll be marrying the eldest daughter of the Yuan family? Jinchen looked directly into the camera. Yu felt his gaze pierce through the screen, finding her where she hid. A slow, deliberate smile touched his lips. The rumors are true, he said, his voice resonating with uncheckable confidence. I found the woman I want to spend my life with. I will be marrying my fiancé, Yuan Yu, very soon. The audacity of it stole her breath. He was cornering her, using his public power, the very thing he'd hidden from her, as a weapon. He was making her a promise in front of the entire world. A wave of fury washed over her. But beneath it, something else stirred. It was a reckless, desperate, magnificent move. It was the act of a man who was done hiding and would burn the world down just to get her to look at him. Xiaorong stared at her. So, what are you going to do? Let him win. Yu watched the man on the screen, a man with 2 names and 1 face, who had shattered her heart and was now trying to publicly piece it back together. The fear and humiliation began to recede, replaced by a spark of her own fire. He had been brave enough to be a fool in front of millions. It was time for her to be brave enough to confront him. No, she said, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. I'm not going to let him win. I'm going to meet him on his own battlefield. The glare of 100 camera flashes illuminated Wen Jinchen's face, that his eyes, broadcast onto a giant screen in a public square, seemed to be looking only for her. Yuan Yu stood frozen amidst the lunchtime crowd, a half-eaten skewer forgotten in her hand, as his voice, calm and resolute, cut through the city's hum. WS Group and the Yuan family have a long-standing agreement, Jinchen stated, his tone flat and corporate. And in accordance with that, I will be proceeding with my marriage to Miss Yuan Xia. A collective gasp rippled through the reporters. Yu's heart plummeted, a cold, heavy stone in her chest. This was it. The public confirmation. But then, Jinchen's gaze lifted, boring directly into the main camera. His voice softened, losing its corporate armor. But there is something the person I love needs to understand. Running away is not a solution. Hiding is not strength. He was speaking to her, only to her. A fire ignited in Yu's veins, hot and defiant. He was calling her out, challenging her in front of the world, no more hiding. Dropping the skewer, she began to run, pushing through the bewildered crowd. A destination, the glittering skyscraper where the press conference was being held live. She burst through the ballroom doors just as a reporter asked about the wedding date. All heads turned. Security guards moved to intercept her. But Jinchen held up a hand, his expression an unreadable mask of shock. Yu marched past the stunned media, her breath ragged, and snatched a microphone from a nearby stand. "My name is Yuan Yu." Her voice trembled but echoed with newfound strength. She looked past Jinchen, past the cameras, and spoke to the ghost that had haunted her for weeks. "And I am also Yuan Xia's sister." A fresh wave of murmurs swept the room. She ignored them. "To the other Yuan Xia, wherever you are," she declared, her eyes burning with unused tears. "You can have the name. You can have the past. But you cannot have my future. I love Wen Jinchen, and I refuse to be a coward and let someone else dictate my happiness. Not anymore." She finally turned to Jinchen, her entire heart exposed in her gaze. His shock had melted into something else entirely, a slow-spreading warmth of awe and profound pride. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He saw her, not the timid assistant, but the woman who had just hijacked a multi-million-dollar corporate announcement to declare her love. Later, the chaos of the press conference faded into the quiet intimacy of a secluded park. The setting sun cast long shadows as they sat on a bench, a careful distance between them. "That was quite a performance," Jinchen said, his voice laced with an amusement that didn't quite hide his relief. "You're the one who called me a coward on national television," Yu shot back, tugging at a loose thread on her sleeve. He sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. "You ran away. You blocked my calls. That's a childish thing to do." He paused, turning to face her fully. "But then, you make me childish, too. I arranged the whole press conference just to get you to listen to me." His confession hung in the air, a raw and vulnerable admission. Yu's defensiveness crumbled, replaced by a wave of tenderness. He was just as lost as she was. She scooted closer, closing the gap between them. For now, it was a truce. The next challenge was her mother. "She hates rich people," Yu warned him, handing him a warm pair of her father's old work overalls. "She thinks they're all arrogant liars who break hearts for sport." Jinchen, CEO of one of the country's largest conglomerates, dutifully stripped off his designer jacket and wrestled into the faded denim. He looked utterly ridiculous and completely endearing. "So, my instructions are: speak less, smile more, and pretend I've never seen a bottle of wine in my life." "Exactly," she said, trying to suppress a giggle. "Just be humble." The dinner was a masterclass in deception. Jinchen, looking more like a disgruntled mechanic than a tycoon, sat stiffly at the small dining table in their family restaurant. When Yu's mother offered him wine, he feigned a look of bewilderment. "Oh, no." The sleek, minimalist expanse of Wen Jinchen's office felt like a sanctuary, a world high above the city, where Yuan Yu finally belonged. She was reviewing a quarterly report on his personal tablet, a comfortable silence settling between them, when the heavy glass doors swept open without a sound. An old man stood framed in the doorway, his presence sucking the air from the room. He carried a dragon-headed cane, though his posture was ramrod straight, and his eyes, a paler, colder version of Jinchen's, swept over the scene with undisguised contempt. This was Wen Jinchen, the iron-willed patriarch of the Wen family and chairman of the board. Jinchen, his voice was a low rumble of authority, but his gaze was fixed on Yu, dissecting her as if she were a flaw in a balance sheet. "What is this? Your office is not a place for idle distractions." Yu froze, the tablet feeling like a lead weight in her hands. Jinchen rose slowly, his body language a subtle shield between her and his grandfather. "Grandfather, you should have called and missed his display of unprofessionalism. When Genshin stepped fully into the office, the thud of his cane on the marble floor punctuating his displeasure, he gestured dismissively at Yu. I have reviewed this girl's performance reports, mediocre at best. Her only notable achievement seems to be ensnaring you. It ends now, fire her, and break off this foolish, impulsive engagement. The Yuan family contract is with Yuan Seer, as was agreed. Each word was a calculated blow, meant to humiliate, to diminish. Yu felt the old, familiar shame creep up her spine. A feeling of being small and insignificant. But then Genshin moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His calm was more potent than any outburst. No, he said. The single word absolute. He walked to Yu's side, his hand gently taking the tablet from her and placing it on the desk. He then took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, a silent, unshakable declaration. Yu stays. If she is fired, then I will leave WS Group with her. And Genshin's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. It was the first crack in his granite facade. You would throw away your birthright for her. I would throw it away to be a man who can choose his own life. Genshin corrected, his voice hardening. But it doesn't have to come to that. A glint of the ruthless CEO she knew as master surfaced in his eyes. You want the Nanhubei development rights. Your rivals are circling. And their last proposal was rejected. Give me 1 month. I will secure the contract personally. And when I do, my life and my marriage are my own to decide. No interference, no contracts, no traditions. That is my deal. A tense silence stretched. The cities hummed far below the only sound. When Genshin stared at his grandson, seeing not the melancholy boy he remembered, but a formidable man, he saw a king claiming his throne. Finally, he gave a curt, sharp nod. 1 month. Don't fail. Without another glance at Yu, he turned and left as abruptly as he had arrived. The moment the doors closed, the strength seemed to drain from Yu's legs. She swayed, but Genshin's arm was instantly around her waist, holding her steady. He turned her to face him, his eyes searching hers. Are you all right? She could only nod, her throat tight. It wasn't the grandfather's cruelty that filled her mind, but Genshin's defense. He had stood before the most powerful man he knew and hadn't just protected her. He had chained his own future to hers. All her lingering doubts, the whispers in her heart that she was just a temporary solace for a lonely man, evaporated like mist in the sun. He was fighting for her, not as a CEO protecting an employee, but as a man protecting his future. Genshin, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She raised her hands to cup his face, her thumbs tracing a strong line of his jaw.